you doing, guys? Today we are starting work on my 1955 senior transmission. In my last video I had indicated that this might have been a later version because of the double detent. I think I'm going to ratchet that back. I don't think this is a later version of the transmission, and I'll show you why in a second. I did pull the bolts off the top of the shifter cover, if you want to call it that, and I have peered inside it. It looks fairly good. So let's just go ahead and pull this off. You can see the shift forks are right there. We take a look at the gear set, and we can see that there's only two synchros, one on either side. If this was a later model, correct me if I'm wrong, there would have been two synchros on each side, so 4 synchro gears for third and second. This is the first gear. That's first gear slid in, and then all the way back would be reverse. The only wear on the gear set that I could find is right here on first gear. These fronts of the teeth are a little bit beat up, and when we look at the bottom cluster gear down there, you can just barely see it. The fronts of the gear are a little bit beat up, and there's no synchronizer on this gear, which goes into first and then goes into reverse. But if we spin the gear set on the top here, okay, there's no chipped teeth, there's nothing missing on the synchros, so we're all good there. Like I said, this gear has a little bit of, a little bit beat up on the front side of the gear, but the teeth are all there and they're all in place. If I take this and slide it forward and we take a look at the reverse gear, all the teeth are there and doesn't, you pain in the butt, but the reverse gear is all good. If we peer down inside and take a look at the cluster gear, everything on that, even that one way down there, I've looked at them, all the teeth are there, nothing is chipped. So really happy about all that. Shifts into third, shifts into second, fine. This gear obviously slides back and forth just fine, so that's all good. When we take a look at the basically where the throwout bearing is, the throwout bearing looks fairly okay. I'm going to go ahead and replace it. I definitely need a new return spring because it's all overstretched. So in general, it looks, this thing has a lot of play. So I'll have to inspect the front bearing for the input shaft. But overall, it looks pretty darn good. The rear bearing I've seen before, or it's been exposed. It's fine. I'm probably not going to replace that. There is a gear, or like another bearing, I should say, inside this gear. That's what carries the weight of this shaft on the front. And when we tear it apart, we'll take a look at it, but I might replace that gear. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and pull the little inspection cover off. Going to get the throwout bearing off. I'm going to press the throwout bearing off of the slide. I'm going to go ahead and remove this roll pin once I get the throwout bearing out of the way, so that way I can slide the clutch arm, or the clutch fork arm, out, get the clutch fork out of the way, and then go ahead and pull the front cover with these 4 bolts, because I can't get to these 2 bolts with the bearing in place. All right, let me get to some tear down. I got a little carried away with the tear down without videoing it, so I apologize. When I go ahead and put this transmission back together, I'll do it in a more detailed fashion. But as of right now, I've pretty much got I got the main gear set out of the transmission. The bearing that was inside this input shaft, it completely disintegrated. So I'll have to get it, at minimum, a new bearing right there. I pretty much have taken a look online, and I can pretty much find everything I need. The new front bearing with the clip, I found a few of them brand new in the box for like 25 bucks. So I'm going to get one of those. I guess there's 2 of these style bearings. There's one here, and then there's one, where is it? At this end, I guess, of the cluster gear. And then there's a different one, but like a shorter version, I guess, right here, that goes with the cluster gear. So I have to look those up, but we'll get 2 new ones of those. And then, I mean, I know this sounds cheap, but this rear bearing is fine. It's absolutely mint condition. So I don't know if I'll replace this particular bearing, but definitely looking into it. This gear, this is the slide gear for first and reverse. I showed you that it's pretty beat up. I found a brand new one cheap for like, I think it was 15 bucks. So I reached out to the seller. So I'm gonna probably just replace this one gear. I know the gear on the cluster gear is a little bit chewed up, but I'm not gonna replace this whole cluster gear. There's really no point in doing that. So that's that. And then the throw-out bearing, I did put it in the press, and I was able to pop. Yeah, I guess I won't be able to pop it, but I was able to pop the throw-out bearing off of the cage. So, oh, there it is. So these are not that expensive. They're like 30 bucks ish, 25 bucks ish, something like that. So I'll get a new throw-out bearing for it. There's a seal inside the case here, right there. I found that's dirt cheap. And then the gasket kit for the whole thing is pretty cheap too, because there's the gasket that goes up here, and then there's a gasket that goes on the front. There would be a gasket that goes on the back, and I may use it actually now that I think about it. But this is where that machined gear case gets bolted on. I'm going to go ahead and pull the cluster gear out as well as the reverse gear. I need to pull this pin right here, this cotter pin out, drift this pin over, and then slide the shaft out. And then this gear, this whole cluster gear will come out. I did take the clutch fork out of the case, so that's out. That just required drifting out a roll pin, which is right here. Right out. I had to sand a little bit of rust off this. It slid right out. That's the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and replace those bushings. These are the bushings. So so in theory, everything here is going to be brand new. All right, when I come back, it'll be in a few days on the basis that I need to order some parts. We'll get the parts in, and then we'll start putting this thing back together. I went ahead and ordered all the parts for the transmission. They're going to be here over the next week or so. So to wrap this particular video up, I thought I'd just give you a nice little exploded view of all the parts and the status of the transmission itself. Parts that we went ahead and replaced was the front seal, got that coming, front main bearing, throw-out bearing, first and reverse gear, that's a new one's coming. This is a oil baffle that goes on the output shaft of the transmission. I got a new one of those because that one's pretty beat up. There are two short roller bearings and one long roller bearing. One short goes in the cluster gear, one goes into the input shaft, and the long one goes to the in the cluster gear at one end. I got a gasket kit. I did get a clutch fork return spring, which this one here is a little bit stretched out. That's the reason why I got it. And this is, found the part number online, and this is what showed up. I don't know if that's going to work. It's obviously bigger diameter, and the hooks, although are the same distance apart as this one's stretched out. So I don't know. I will deal with this when we get there, but luckily it was cheap. It wasn't that expensive. So those are the basic parts that are coming. Oh, and then I got two bushings for the clutch fork coming for the case. So in general, that's the parts that are on their way. Looking over the parts themselves that are going back in, we have the clutch fork itself. We have the clutch fork rod. That's all cleaned and ready to go. I'll get a new roll pin for it. This is where the throw-out bearing, I guess this is the throw-out bearing carriage, if you want to call it that. That spring hooks up to the top of this, and that's what drives it in and out, or in this case, up and down on this outer piece right here, like that. This is the front cover. The new seal that I got coming goes in this, or from the back side, but goes in. Bolts are clean, drain plugs. The 6 bolts that hold the top loader cover in place. I will tear that apart with the shifter once I get most of this transmission back together. This is the main input shaft. The main bearing, the front bearing goes right here. It's sort of pressed into place, and then it uses this clip to hold it in place. I got this clip off without deforming it. I don't know how that happened, but we'll reuse that. That's all good. And this is another oil control baffle that goes right here. I'm going to reuse this one because that one's in real nice shape. Where else can we go? Reverse gear pin that it rides on. This is the pin that holds the reverse pin and the cluster shaft rod in place. That's all clean. Here's the rear bearing. That is in good shape, so we're just going to reuse that. This is the whoopsie daisy. This is the spacer that holds the two bearings on the cluster gear apart from each other. That's gotten clean, be reused. What's actually kind of neat is this rod is actually magnetized. I don't know if that's factory or not, but there was all sorts of cakey silver gear oil stuck to it, so it works. Back to the input shaft. This is third gear synchro. The bearing, the roller bearing that disintegrated was down inside here, so that's all good and cleaned up. This here is the synchro, or the shifter synchro, that kind of goes in and out. The lock second gear would be behind it, third gear in front of it. That's all clean and ready to go. This is the intermediary gear, if you want to call it. It goes in this position. It's on this shaft here, which we'll get to in a second. And this is what's inside this gear. There's a bushing. I'm going to put this down so it doesn't roll off onto the floor. There's a retainer, a bushing, and then another retainer. This goes in this position right over that hole. And then there's like a spring and a plunger. I'll show you how to put this all back together when I reassemble it. But all those parts are in good shape, so we're just going to go ahead and reuse it. This is the main output shaft. This sticks out the transmission. This is where that roller bearing goes on, which goes ultimately inside there. I went ahead and wire wheeled it all down, cleaned it all up, so it's all set. I had some marks of rust, but it doesn't matter. This little ring gets pressed onto the front of the shaft. This is the spacer, which keeps the roller bearing into the input shaft and not traveling around. And then we have the cluster gear itself. There's a shim that goes towards one side. There's another shim that goes on the other side. This is a bearing retainer that kind of fits inside these teeth right here. That keeps the long bearing from rolling out. I'll show you how that goes. The only gear that's going back in that's a little bit chipped up is this one right here. I will file these down and get that smoothed up, but I'm not replacing the cluster gear. It's fine. We're not going to have any problems with that. And then obviously the shaft. The case itself is in great shape. It's all cleaned up and ready to go. So we're just waiting on parts at this point in time. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please, if you're interested or you think somebody would be interested in seeing this 1955 Wheel Horse Senior put back together, please share the video. And I really appreciate all your nice comments. So until the next part of this project, you have a great day.